her books that are both for kids and for adults and everybody in between. Her name is Budge Wilson. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Leslie.
Good
Glad
to have
be
you here. Now, I read recently in a writer's newsletter that you eavesdrop in restaurants, you stare at people, you don't pay your bills, and you take a tape recorder to bed. What's going on here?
I admit it sounds pretty funny.
Sounds pretty bad.
And I don't do them all at the same time. It's true that when I'm in a restaurant, I really watch people, because you see all kinds of things going on that lead you into ideas for stories. If you're watching, for instance, a table and say there's a man there and he's obviously having a fight with his kid, you can't help but say to yourself, whose fault is this? Is this a really difficult kid, or is this a really difficult father? And if you think about it hard enough, you start building a story. And in the same way, I do a lot of listening. Now, I do it for two reasons. I certainly am very nosy, and I think that writers are all nosy. If they meet someone, they want to know their whole past and everything about them because they're just made that way. But certainly if you sit in a booth in a restaurant, you very often hear an awful lot of things that are pretty high drama.
Are you taking notes?
No, I'm not taking notes. I'm just stuffing it away in my head.
Okay.
And sometimes those things will lead you into a story pretty quickly. Then's when you need to take your notes. Write it on the paper napkin or something if you have a hot idea for a story. But the other reason for listening to people talk is that you start having an ear for dialogue, so that you're not putting a 6-year-old's dialogue into the mouth of someone who's 35 or 85. And the more listening you do of people talking, the more you're aware of the way people talk, and it sounds legitimate when it's on the page. Same with different parts of the country. In this province alone, just along a stretch of shoreline, I'm sure you're aware of that, living on the eastern shore, but certainly we are on the south shore, that you can go 6 miles and people speak differently from the way they are.
Different vocabulary, different sound to
That's
their
right.
words, all that sort of
yeah,
thing.
different accents, different vocabulary, you're right.
Yeah.
Now, the sleeping with a tape recorder is trickier, because I find that one of the times the best ideas come to you are at, between 2 and 3:30 at night if you wake up, and I'm not such a great sleeper, so I often wake up at 3. And I think your mind is in a kind of different phase from what it is either when you're asleep or when you're wide awake. They say that everybody has this experience when they just wake up, even if it's the morning, but often it's so quick that you don't know it's there. But your mind is, I think, almost empty, so that if something comes cruising into that empty space, it's often something that's worth listening to.
So this is good fertile time for that. But do you have to turn on the light to push the button on the tape recorder and then start talking?
No.
Your husband's there asleep beside you, presumably. Does this bother him?
I can do all this in the dark. And
He doesn't wake up?
I don't use, no. I dive under the covers and feed whatever I have to say into the tape recorder, although I have found now that I can write in the dark. What you don't want to do is turn the light on, because then you're wide awake and can't get back to sleep again.
You want to stay in that place as much as possible.
But I always, everywhere I go, I have a piece of paper and a pencil, and I can take it in the dark now and write, and you've got something in the morning, but you don't dare let it go. You think that maybe you're sure that in the morning that good idea will still be there. But it usually isn't.
Yes, I know that feeling. Things get lost.
I bet you do.
Very easily.
Yeah.
Now, you've created so many characters. I want to know, where do those characters go after you've created them and put them in a book? Do they stay put?
Well, they certainly walk around in my head. And things will happen in the course of everyday life, and I will suddenly think, oh, so-and-so would like this. Daniel would like this, or Lorinda wouldn't like this.
And those are your fictional characters?
Those are my fictional characters. And they're very real people to me. And I kind of, if it's a short story, I kind of hate to let them go. One of the nice things about a series, and I do have one series for kids called the Blue Harbor series, is that you stay with those children. They get 1 year older with each book, but but they're the same people. And for one thing, you don't have to dream up a brand new character with each book, but they change. And you feel very friendly toward them.
It's good to be back with them while
Yeah.
you're writing that
Yeah, I like
particular
that.
book. Any personal favorites of your characters? Somebody who's one or two that stand out?
I know that in that particular series, I'm very fond of James, who in the first book is only 7 years old, but I think he's the only character I've ever made from a real person, because I try very hard not to do that. But the person I made him like was 75 when he was 7, so I didn't, well, I think I told the real James, gave him the same name. But he's the same type of person. He's very fair and looks at both sides of everything, knows how to get in the shoes or moccasins of other people, and I admire James. And it's almost as though he's out, he's out there. I can admire James, even
though you've created him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does a writer have to have compassion to be a good writer?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think if you're writing for children, you do, because there's a kind of unwritten law that you have to at least end on some kind of note of hope. That doesn't mean that all the strings are pulled together and everything is made perfect. For instance, if someone is made blind, say a child is made blind in a story, there's no need, in fact, it's probably not good to give him back his sight at the end of the story, but you have to, in some kind of way, make it clear that he's going to be able to cope with that and the way he's going to cope with that. And I don't think you can do that without compassion.
Yes.
Maybe you can do a kind of savage thing with adult literature in which you're not feeling compassion, but I don't know that I do.
The book, The Leaving, was a kind of turning point, I think, for you, and the publisher says about it that it concerns taking leave of the absolute certainties of childhood, or maybe that was your term, I don't know.
No,
But that's a good one, and that does fit the book. Explain a little bit about that, leaving behind these absolute certainties of childhood, moving into that other dimension.
Well, I know when they put together that collection, they chose stories that all had to do with coming of age. Now, it might be coming of age in the memory of someone who is 75 or middle age, but on the whole, it's most of the stories are saying this was what childhood was, and these are the steps that someone had to take to become an adult. Now, maybe that child doesn't become an adult. I can think of one story in particular called The Diary, in which she doesn't really become an adult until she's about 55, because I think that process is often a long one.
Wow.
But as a result of
I
that,
can identify with that. I don't think.
yes, I think we all can. But we're working with the child within, which is something a little different. But as a result of this happening, the book has become what's called a crossover book, in which there's a double readership. There's a readership amongst those who are at that stage where they're leaving childhood and entering adulthood, adolescence. And it's used a lot in high schools and in some universities. And then it's got a readership amongst adults, but some people are pretty confused when they go to look for it in the library, because you never know where you'll find it. Same with the bookstore.
Yeah, that's pretty tricky. I wanted to ask you about that. In fact, how does a book make that crossover? Can it be both a kid's book and an adult's book? Does it have something to do with the language that you choose to write it in?
No, I don't think so, because I don't really choose my language all that carefully with the narrative. I choose my language very carefully when the people are talking. But on the whole, I will talk to a child in grade 6 in almost the same way that I will talk to you. It's more subject matter, I think, and getting inside people's heads. And I think it appeals to adults because they want to remember that time in their life. It's usually a pretty vivid time, adolescent, and pretty grim time. It's full of all kinds of conflicts.
Heaven and hell all at once.
Yeah, no, it's a hard time. So I think adults like it because they can remember that and plug into it, and kids like it because they're going through it. But it is a tricky thing because it's hard to market it often because
Yes, it's
who are
almost
you
like you
market?
need two different book covers.
That's right. This is how a lot of writers and a lot of publishers are hoping that the barriers will go down between children's books, young adult books, and adult books, and that books become just books.
Yes.
Because look at us all, we all love to read the Pooh books, eh? And those were supposed to be for kids.
Mm-hmm.
But there are certain children's books and certainly young adult books that are wonderfully suitable for adults. I'm thinking
right.
of something like Forbidden City by William Bell, which was, well, that's another one. It was written as an adult book, and it's about the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Yeah,
Awfully good
story,
book.
story. Now, you mentioned getting inside the heads of characters. I noticed that you used diaries.
Yes.
Come up again and again, both in your stories and even this, full format for a book. Why choose that method?
Well, I choose that method for that very reason. If you're writing a letter or a diary or just speaking a monologue, as the person, the main person, you can't help but get inside their head and you start seeing what their voice is, because I don't want all my voices to be the same voices. I'm not talking here about dialogue. I'm just talking about, well, supposing I write 3 stories that all involve diaries, you mustn't have each diary sound as though it's the same person writing it.
Sure.
Now, I have a story out right now called 2 Diaries. It's not out. It's out on the market, It's looking for a publisher.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it is a story written for adolescents. And it's written in the voice of 2 people who are keeping diaries at the same time, a girl who is in high school and a boy who is in high school. And they have a secret feeling for one another, but they're not expressing it except in their diaries. And I had to be very careful that the voices were very dissimilar. And when I sent the manuscript in, I even typed it with a different font. The girl's was a little bit smaller and a more delicate form of print, and his was a little bit stronger.
To keep the voices distinct. Did you write a diary when you were younger?
I did indeed, but that's a sad story. I wrote a very full diary when I was 16 and 17. Great big books like that, very thick. Everything I thought, felt, hoped for, loved, hated, was amused by. And there was a lot going on at the time because the war was still on, the Second World War. And so there was a lot of background stuff too. And I thought, okay, fine, I will write these diaries. I finished them when I was at the end of grade 11. And I thought I'll open these when I'm 40, and that will be fun to read, but I couldn't wait. And I opened them when I was 20. Now there's a big, big difference between 16, 17, and 20, or there was then. I read maybe 4 pages. I was so embarrassed by all this foolishness that I took all 3 and threw them into the kitchen stove, which was burning brightly at the time.
Wow. Go on.
I still grieve about those.
You needed that distance of time to look at them.
Yeah, I'm really
Was it
sad
crucial?
about that.
Yeah, that is a bit of a loss. We're going to take a break right now. My guest is Budge Wilson, and we'll be back right after this. Hi, we're back on Off the Page. My guest today is Budge Wilson. Budge, tell me about your friendship with Margaret Laurence.
Oh, my friendship with Margaret Laurence started probably about 12 years before she died. She moved to Lakefield when I was living in Peterborough, which is about 6.5 miles away, although I had met her once beforehand. And she wanted to buy a lot of antiques for a house she had bought, and someone said, if you want to know where all those stores are, go and ask Budge Wilson, because I was kind of into that thing myself at the time. So that's how we started. And I was not yet writing, and I think the relationship was unique in a way in that it wasn't based on writing.
And this would have been a fairly high point in her literary career, right?
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Lots of attention.
She had
Stone
written
Angel.
all those novels, I think, except The Diviners. And during the time when I knew her, she was writing The Diviners. But all the other ones, The Jest of God and the other ones that we're familiar with, The Bird in the House, those had already been written. So she was a big literary figure. But not only was I not a writer, I wasn't all that big a reader. When I met her, I certainly did read her books, but I read them in a different way from the way I would read them now. I read them as a good read, and I thought they were a good read, and I told her that, and I told her I liked them, but that was it. We didn't go further in that. We didn't talk about writing. We talked about, I would say we talked about the raw material of writing. We talked about life. She was great to talk to about life, you know.
She was injured in a way by public response to her books, by the criticism, the censorship.
Oh yes, she was very injured by the reaction to The Diviners because it was banned in a couple of schools. And at that time, I went to meetings with the school board and so on and so forth, and people who felt that this was an unfair censorship, as so much censorship is, rose to her defense and helped her out at that time, but there was very little we could do to help. I mean, we could talk to the media and we could talk to other people, but she was so injured by it that she couldn't even see any humor in it. Perhaps it's hard to see humor in these things, but I've often heard people say, oh, you know, someone's book is banned, good. Now it'll be a bestseller in no time. And I remember going to a party shortly after the first banning took place, and she walked in the room and someone got up and said, oh, well, Margaret, this is a great moment for you because your book is going to really take off. Not amused. Yeah. She was very, very angry. And then she went from being very, very angry to being extremely hurt because, understandably, because she felt people were not reading her books with intelligence and insight, and she knew that a lot of the people who were in the group that were banning her books hadn't even read them. They would take little pieces out of them. And she found that hurt her. And then she was hurt on behalf of all the other people who had been banned. So it was a huge thing, and I think it took a lot of the energy and drive.
A writer needs a pretty tough skin.
Very tough skin. And I think she had a tough skin in a lot of ways in connection with her writing. She didn't have a tough skin in connection with that, and I think it depleted a lot of her energy. You know, I think there are a lot of reasons why she basically stopped writing novels. I know she tried. She would start again and again. She would talk about her false starts, but I don't think she had the same kind of focus because she was involved in a lot of causes too. The bomb, whales.
And the bomb saved the whales, saved the world. Yeah.
So there were a lot of things that fragmented her concentration at that time. And I think she was very uneasy. I think we all felt when we read The Diviners that when the diviner lost his power to divine water, I think we all felt nervous that maybe she was talking about herself.
What about your fiction? Is it autobiographical fiction? You've suggested that it's not.
I probably
picking up bits and pieces.
Yeah, I have suggested that it's not, but the longer I live and when I go back to rereading my stories, I often find a lot of autobiographical stuff in there that I didn't know was there because I tend to read without thinking too much. I get moving and I just go with it. And I think if you write like that, instead of stopping every few sentences thinking, now what am I going to say next, which I don't do, I just go with it, then I think a lot of stuff comes in through your subconscious that you don't know is there. Now that book, Oliver's War, is on the table. 2.5 years after I wrote that book, although it's about a boy who in many ways is very different from me, I realized it's a whole lot like what I was as a child. I kept everything inside. I didn't talk about my worries or fears or angers. Everyone thought everything was hunky-dory with me.
Well, these are universal things, but I noticed there's a lot in their stories about overcoming fears, both in the adult literature and the kids' books. That's a pretty big one for you, isn't it?
Is there?
Sure. You didn't know that?
And I do notice in reading back, and I seldom do read things again unless I have to give a session on something, that there certainly is a theme in which someone is held in and suddenly lets go. And I think there's a lot of me in that. I know as a child, it never occurred to me to stand up to my mother. She was able to express temper, worry, anxiety, and all that kind of thing, but we were supposed to act as though everything was fine. And I think that's very hard on a child.
This overcoming fears, we think about that in terms of children, and you write about that for kids. Is this a lifelong thing, a sequence of events?
Oh, sure it is. Yesterday and today I spent doing editing on a book that's coming out in the fall. And there were a lot of ways in which the editor made suggestions that I definitely didn't approve of, or I didn't agree with. Her view of what that book should be was often in agreement with me, but often not. She was very interested in the grammatical end of it and brevity. She wanted to cut me down. Now, a lot of that is really good, I think, when you're dealing with a novel, kids or adults' novel, that you don't just run at the mouth and go on and on and on. But a lot of my sentences were what they were because I was looking for a rhythm.
So you had this kind of editorial battle going on there.
Well, yeah, it was a very, very civilized battle, and she was very, very nice about it. I was very, very nice about it. But I found there was a knot in my stomach the whole time because I found it hard to express strongly how I felt and to fight for what I wanted.
I know that battle very well. We're going to take a short break right now,
Yeah.
Budge, and we'll be back right after this. You've been watching Off the Page today. My guest has been Budge Wilson. Budge, we're here right at the tail end of the show. You write about difficult issues, mental illness, mental breakdown.
Well, some of the things I've experienced myself, not mental breakdown, but I've known a lot of people who have had nervous breakdowns, and I've seen many sides of it. People I've known very, very well.
You brought it into your fiction very well.
Well, yes, I did use it.
And thank you for coming on our show.
It's been nice to be here.
Budge Wilson was the guest. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.